is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
I don't think because you're a great student that it has to necessarily preclude you being interested in being a really good basketball player. So we were able to find a lot of guys who cared about both things.
Bill Fenlon, the winningest head coach in DePauw University men's basketball history, amassed 585 wins, 6 NCAA tournament appearances, and 7 conference championships in 37 seasons overall as a collegiate head coach, including 30 at DePauw. Fenlon previously coached 7 seasons as a head coach at Sewanee, Rose-Hulman, and Southwestern University. He retired in 2022 as the 4th winningest active coach in Division III. Fenlon was recognized as the 2021 Jack Bennett Award recipient, which is presented annually to a non-Division I head coach who achieves success on the basketball court while also displaying great moral integrity off the court. Fenlon's impact has been felt beyond the student athletes he's coached as he has annually led student teams to Belfast, Northern Ireland, to work with PeacePlayers International on conflict resolution and peace initiatives. As a collegiate player, Bill earned 3 letters as a member of the Northwestern Wildcats basketball team. He was an all-state player at Marist High School in Atlanta and was inducted into the school's Athletic Hall of Fame in 2006. Hey, Hoopheads, prepare to push beyond what you thought was possible this season with the best training solutions for your team at the best prices ever. From now until September 30th, score $3,000 off the Dr. Dish Rebel Plus, $3,000 off the Dr. Dish All-Star Plus, and $3,000 off the Dr. Dish CT Plus during the Dr. Dish semi-annual sales event. See all offers at drdishbasketball.com and follow their incredible content at Dr. Dish B-Ball on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Mention the Hoopheads podcast and save an extra $300 on the Dr. Dish Rebel, All-Star, and CT models. Those are some great deals, Hoopheads. Get your Dr. Dish shooting machine today.
Hi, this is Jerry Buckley from Bishop Kenny High School in Jacksonville, Florida, and you are listening to the Hoopheads podcast.
Prepare like the pros with the all-new Fast Draw and Fast Scout. Fast Draw has been the #1 play diagramming software for coaches for years. You'll quickly see why Fast Model Sports has the most compelling and intuitive basketball software out there. For a limited time, Fast Model is offering Hoopheads listeners 15% off Fast Draw and Fast Scout. Just use the code HHP15 at checkout to grab your discount, and you'll be on your way to more efficient game prep and improved communication with your team. Fast Model also has new coaching content every week on its blog, plus play and drill diagrams on its Playbank. Check out the links in the show notes for more. Fast Model Sports is the best in basketball. Be prepared with a notebook and pen as you listen to this episode with Bill Fenlon, retired head men's basketball coach at DePauw University. Hello and welcome to the Hoopheads podcast. It's Mike Klinzing here with my co-host Jason Sunkel tonight. And we are pleased to be joined by Bill Fenlon, retired head men's basketball coach at DePauw University, among lots of other stops in his coaching career. Bill, welcome to the Hoopheads pod.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Thrilled to have you. Looking forward to diving into all the things you've been able to do in your career. Let's start by going back in time to when you were a kid. Tell me a little bit about some of your first experiences with the game of basketball. What made you fall in love with it?
Well, it's funny that you would ask me that as the first question, because probably about a month ago, I drove up. When you're retired, you have like time on your hands and you can you can actually say yes to stupid things that you wouldn't normally do. And I drove up I was in Chicago for something else, and I drove up to Wisconsin, which is where I spent some formative years as a kid, and to a kind of grade school reunion, and saw a bunch of guys that I played 6th, 7th, 8th grade sports with, and drove by my home court, like the outdoor court that I first started playing on. And that was in Brookfield, Wisconsin. I was probably the first year that I played organized basketball. I think I was in 6th grade. Now they start when you're 6 years old, right? but this was in the Stone Ages, and you couldn't be, you had to wait to be on a team, right? Like you had to, before that, you had to just go out and pick teams and fight and argue about calls and do all of that kind of stuff. But I was able to go back and kind of whip around, give myself a little history tour, and it was really fun. Brought back a lot of interesting memories. So my first year of being on an organized team was the 6th grade, and I was involved with the team every year for the next 50 some years, except for one year, my first year out of college, I didn't coach. So just growing up in Wisconsin, it's snowing, you had to find a way to get inside, so the hoops get you inside.
That is definitely true. So tell me a little bit about just that experience of growing up with pickup basketball, and obviously the culture today, much different for somebody who's growing up as a young basketball player in the country today compared to what it was like when you were a kid or when I was a kid. So tell me a little bit about just your experiences with pickup basketball and how you feel like it influenced you maybe as a player and then ultimately maybe even as a coach.
Well, and I've actually thought a lot about this. I think that, pre AAU days and all of those kinds of things, the players maybe weren't as talented, and they didn't have all the doodads and all the ways to get better, all the training and that sort of stuff. But when you talk to coaches, one of the things that you hear almost constantly is, kids, they don't know how to communicate, and they don't, we really need some leadership and all of those kinds of things. And I think those things get formed when you're figuring it out on your own, right? So when you're picking the teams and calling the fouls, and you want to have a game on a Saturday afternoon, well, you got to get on the phone and you got to find enough guys to play, right? And I think that just the tools that you develop when you have to do that, right? Like when you have to settle arguments and be the last guy picked and be the first guy picked and all of those kinds of things, I think are things that kind of become part of your basketball DNA a little bit. And it does solve some of the issues that I think we as coaches find pretty prevalent today, because the reality in today's kids is somebody's telling them what to do all the time. There is an adult prescribing every movement in their basketball lives. And so whether that's, here's what team you're going to play on, we're going to take you to practice, here's the tournaments that we're going to play in, and I think it's the fact that people are flying to the other side of the country on an AAU team and if you got an AAU team with 10 guys on it and you're trying to play guys the same amount of minutes, these guys are maybe playing 60 minutes, 70 minutes over the course of a weekend. And if you stayed home and you went down to the park, you could play, 15 hours, right? You'd have the ball in your hands all the time, right? I think that there's some great experiences involved with the travel and, being on organized teams and those kinds of things. But I think the thing is just kind of grown into this speeding train that we can't seem to stop at this point in time. And I think because of that, guys just aren't developing some of those tools that I think that guys in my generation had an opportunity to do, because we didn't know any better, right? There weren't any other options, so we just had to go figure it out on our own.
Yeah, I see that not only just from a basketball coaching standpoint, but I see it as a elementary phys ed teacher, where picking teams and getting kids to be able to play and understanding how to win and to lose graciously and just being able to communicate when something doesn't go perfectly the way it's supposed to or the way they think it's supposed to. You end up with lots of arguing and lots of people that don't know how to sort of navigate all those things that you learned and I learned on the playground or in the backyard or on the sand lot, whatever it might have been. You kind of had to figure it out, as you said. And to me, I think that is something that has been lost when we talk about just the sort of parent-driven format that we have for youth basketball today. As you said, it's very, very rare that a kid does anything in any sport without mom or dad sitting on the sideline, and certainly without a coach. It's very, very rare that kids get the opportunity to experiment and just do some of those things that we got to do as a kid. And yet, I do think that there's a lot of positives to it in terms of, as you said, the access the kids have to drills. In some cases, much better coaching, although not always. You hope that if the parents make a good decision, you figure out who the best coaches are in terms of development and helping kids to get better. You have all those opportunities. So it is certainly a different landscape than it was when you were a kid. As you move up into becoming a high school player, what do you remember about just your relationship with your coaches and your teammates as a high school player?
Well, I like I said, I kind of had my early years in Wisconsin, but between my freshman and my sophomore year in high school, my family moved to Atlanta. So I became the new kid, right? So my experience was a little bit different in that, I wasn't around a bunch of guys that I'd been around my entire life. So I was able to catch on pretty quickly. My dad built a full court in the back of our house. So we moved in at the end of the school year, my freshman year, and we didn't know anybody. And I had a brother who was a year younger than me, who was also a player. And I wasn't, I hadn't really blossomed yet as a player. And he and I played one-on-one full court basketball for 3 straight months. And when school started, I was all of a sudden pretty good, and things kind of took off from there. So I played on a really good team at a really good school in Atlanta. And when my sophomore year, we had 4 sophomores that started on the varsity, and we were all really good friends and played together all the way through, and just kind of blew an opportunity to win a state championship in the semifinals, and had a great experience. In fact, one of the guys that I played with, he and I ended up playing college basketball together as well. So we were on the same teams for 7 straight years, and I still one of my best friends. And, I'm 67 years old now, and this is a guy who I still hang out with, who I was sitting in the back seat of his car when he had his learner's permit, and his dad was, driving us to summer league games. So Atlanta was a really good opportunity for me to kind of reinvent myself as a player. Had a pretty good high school coach who was, I was a point guard, and was really good about just kind of letting me figure things out on my own, and most of the time it kind of worked out for us, and had a terrific experience as a high school player.
When did the idea of playing college basketball get on your radar? Was that something that you were thinking about from the time you were a young kid back in Wisconsin, or did it become more of a reality as you got to Atlanta and started to really experience your high school career?
Well, when I was in Wisconsin, that was so my dad had partnered up with maybe one or two guys, and we had like pieces of season tickets to the expansion Milwaukee Bucks. So I was there and able to see games when they drafted Lou Alcindor, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and then they traded for Oscar Robertson and won an NBA championship. And I was able to go to those games and see Jerry West and watch these unbelievable players. And at the same time, Marquette was coached by Al McGuire, and that was their heyday as well. And in fact, Al McGuire's son, Allie, was the counselor at our park in the summer, and I used to like rebound for him all summer long. And so, we were kind of surrounded by basketball. And when you're a kid, you're always dreaming. But I wasn't a dumb kid, so at that time, I knew I wasn't going to be. I knew I wasn't good enough to play at those levels. At least I didn't feel like I was on track for that. And then eventually I kind of did get on track for it. So it worked out pretty well. But that was a really fertile time to be and a great place to be a kid who really was interested in the game of basketball, for sure.
What are three pretty big names in the game of basketball when you start talking about Kareem, the Big O, and Al McGuire? People that, again, anybody who is involved in the game is very familiar with those names. And for you to kind of have that firsthand experience growing up there in Milwaukee obviously has a big impact on you. What's your thought process in terms of choosing a school? Who's helping you to navigate the process? Because obviously, back at the time you're being recruited, the information that's out there is not like it is today, where you can go on the internet and you can try to figure some things out. If you don't know or have anybody who has experience in the recruiting world, it's kind of hard to figure out what's happening. So what do you remember about the recruiting process and just how you went about making your decisions?
Well, thank God it wasn't as sophisticated back then, or I probably never would have gotten the same opportunity. I would have been found out a long time beforehand. But what's interesting is, so I'm a 1975 high school graduate, right? I mean, I never played on another team that wasn't my high school team, right? Your high school team maybe played in the summer league or something like that, but they're just, recruiting just wasn't like it is today. It's not, I mean, it doesn't even resemble what goes on today at every level, from the small college level up to the highest levels. It is a completely different animal. My thought process, I was actually at a private school, probably the top one or two private schools in Atlanta from an academic standpoint. So I had a little help in school, and in my mind, I always thought, what, if I get the opportunity, I want to go to I was smart enough to think, maybe I want to go to the best school that wants me. Right. So
yep.
I had a few different people coming after me, and I was really sort of back then, guys would have lists, right? So if you're, in this case, it's Georgia or Georgia Tech or, whatever, and they would have, the first line guys that they wanted. And then if we don't get this guy and we don't get that guy, then, they'll go to the second line guy. So I was a second line guy on a lot of people's lists. So I was getting strung along by Georgia and Georgia Tech, and a lot of smaller schools were talking to me. And then just sometimes in life things just work out strangely. So I had the guy who coached the freshman basketball team at my high school. His brother-in-law was a freshman at Northwestern, and he sent some. We didn't even know it, so he sent some film up there, and wrote the staff a letter, and they liked it. And they brought us up for a visit, and when I say us, I'm talking about this guy Randy Carroll was my teammate and still one of my best friends. So we were, people always thought we were a package deal, but I didn't care what he did and he didn't care what I did, but it was kind of cool that we were able to do it together. And so they brought us up for a visit and worked us out, probably illegally, pretty sure. But they'd never seen us in person, and they kind of threw us in there with some guys and sat up in the top row and peeked around a little bit, and ended up offering us. And Northwestern, as I was listening to a podcast today, is the number 9. U.S. News and World Report has them as the number 9 ranked school in the country from an academic standpoint. So I was able to play in the Big Ten, go to an unbelievable school, and get a degree that I was too stupid to figure out how to monetize. But all my other friends that went there made a whole bunch of money, but they tended to kind of live vicariously through me a little bit.
There you go. All right. So clearly in your process, academics was important, and obviously basketball, an important piece of it. What were you thinking about career-wise as you headed to school? Were you like a typical 18-year-old that had no idea what you wanted to do? Was coaching already on your radar? What were you thinking at that point?
Well, when I went to school, I thought, when I was in high school, I thought I wanted to coach. And okay. then when I got to college, we weren't very good, and I wasn't very good. And I was also in an environment where, all these people are going to go be masters of the universe, right? I mean, I went to school with some very bright people who, have had unbelievable careers in business and all kinds of other areas. So, you get influenced by what's going on around you. So I thought, well, maybe that's what I'm supposed to do too, right? And so I kind of got away from the notion, and it took that first year out of school for me to kind of go, you know what? I forgot what I really wanted to do was this other thing, right? And the ball started bouncing in October, and I'm like, oh, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and so I ended up kind of rethinking my path a little bit, and actually came down here. I'm in Florida right now. I came down here, and I was gonna, because it's warmer, and I lived that first year and worked in business in New York City, and then came down to Florida. My wife, who was not my wife yet, she's from here, and I was going to take some classes, get certified to teach, and be a high school coach and teacher. That's what I set out to do.
What'd you do during that intervening year when you were in New York? What was the job?
I worked for the JCPenney company in their corporate headquarters, like right in the middle of Manhattan.
Decided you didn't want to sit in an office.
I did not want to do the office thing. It was just, and I knew it right away, right? Like, I knew it within, a month, right? And I stuck it out for, I don't know, about 7-8 months or something like that. And just because I was just afraid of like how it would look to quit,
right?
2 days after you start. So I hung in there as long as I could, and then bailed and just started the journey of trying to become at the time thinking I was going to teach English and coach basketball.
So that first experience that you get as a coach, you're in Tampa, you get a head coaching job at a prep school. what does that look like? Did you know right away? Conversely, okay, 2 days into your job in New York, you knew you didn't like it. 2 days into your coaching, how'd you feel about it?
Yeah, I knew that I was doing what I needed to be doing. And what's interesting, so I came down here and I was taking some classes at the University of South Florida to try to get certified to teach. And because I never took an education class at Northwestern, because that's not what I was going to do, right? And so while I was doing that, I met some people, and there was a Catholic grade school down here that needed like a PE guy and a coach. So and I'm like, I'll do it, right? So this was like halfway through the year they had lost somebody, and I'm like, and I said I'll do it. So I was coaching 3 basketball teams and a soccer team, and I didn't know. I still couldn't tell you what offsides is, really. I don't know anything about soccer, but I was able to bluff my way through that. So and then that year I got married, and then the next year I got a head coaching job and a teaching job at a private school where I didn't have to be certified. And so I stopped taking classes because I didn't have time to take classes. Because I was teaching like every period in the day. They're like, you can teach. They had me teaching 3 different English preparations, and I'd never taught a class before or taken an education class, right? And one of the classes was AP sophomore English. There were 9 kids in the class, right? 8 of those kids went to Ivy League schools. And honest to God, I was exactly 1 day ahead of those kids all year. Like the only, they were all smarter than me. The good news is they didn't know it because they were only 15 years old at the time, right? And so I plowed my way through that year, and then they said, and you can make an extra, $1,000 if you teach this PE class during your free period. So I'm like, okay, I'll do that too. And so I didn't even have a period off, right? So I was teaching every period of the day, and then trying to figure out how to coach. And this school had just started. I was about 7 years old, and they were literally renting space on the University of Tampa campus. Tampa Prep is the name of the school, and now they have an absolutely beautiful campus that is across the street from the University of Tampa. And so at the time, the school didn't even have a gym, so we would rent a gym 3 days out of the week, and then I would have to run over to the park after my last class and try to stake out the court so we could practice outside for an hour before the public school kids got there and started laughing at my kids. And so it was a pretty wild year. And then the next year I took a job at another private school, mainly because they had a gym. And it made things a little bit easier, but
it's always helpful.
Yeah, it did make it easier. You didn't have to worry about where you were renting a gym and all of that kind of stuff. But so in between, so that next year, I don't know who had the job at Tampa Prep, but that following year, my brother graduated from college. My younger brother, 5 years younger than me. And I got him an interview at Tampa Prep, and he has been there ever since.
Wow. Holy cow.
So he's been there 40 some years. His name is on the court. He has won a state championship. He's had all kinds of Division I players, and he is the winningest all-time the all-time winningest high school coach in the state of Florida. He's won like 860 games or some crazy number like that. So it's kind of weird how things work out for you and others. You just got to keep your head down and keep plugging away.
Absolutely. All right. So you spent 2 years now at these two different prep schools. And then how do you make that leap to college basketball and get that assistant coaching job at the University of the South for the first time?
Well, we're going through, my history thing right now, which I'm happy to do, but I don't think that anyone, who's listening should try to duplicate this pathway that I took, because it's pretty, I do a lot of mentoring. I talk to a lot of kids, and there's way better plans that you can have than the plan that I had. That's for sure. So the second year I was a high school coach down here, I had a really good team, and we got to the final 8 in the state, and I was named the coach of the year in Tampa and blah blah blah. So I thought I had it going on, and so my wife is a theater artist, and she kind of went through the same thing. She thought she was gonna be a master of the universe, and then she decided, what I really want to do is be an actor. And so she went back to school. We got married and she went back to school. So we were literally just barely scraping by down here. And then after that second year, she got an opportunity to go to Louisville. There's a place called the Actors Theater in Louisville, which is one of the top regional theaters in the country. And she had an opportunity to go there for a year and be part of their apprentice company, where you just kind of learn everything about the theater, right? And she's like, I need to do this. I'm going to do this. And so that summer, I had been part of, it was kind of the beginning of the AAU stuff. So at the time, and I know that I don't think they have this anymore, they used to have an AAU category that was 19 and under. So you had guys that had just graduated from, you could have some guys that were going into their senior year, but you could have a lot of guys that were already graduated and committed. So I was involved helping coach this team called Team Florida in the 19 and unders. So we had the best players in the state, and 6 of those guys ended up playing in the NBA. And we played the Russian junior national team. We took these guys to Central America. We won the AAU national championship, and it was an unbelievable experience. And through that, I met a bunch of people. Well, one guy offered me a job because I'm thinking, I don't know. I really like teaching, first of all. I really enjoyed that, and I could have kept doing it. But I was also thinking, well, if I think I might want to coach in college, the part I don't know if I'm going to like is the recruiting. And this guy offered me a job, and at the time, you guys maybe aren't old enough to remember, because the NCAA likes to change up how they figure out the staffs and all of that kind of stuff. So at the time, they had part-time guys and GAs and full-time guys and whatever. And so this guy was going to give me the part-time job, but I was going to be recruiting. So I don't even remember how that was supposed to work, but that was the deal. And this was at Austin Peay State University, which is in the Ohio, mid-major Ohio Valley in Tennessee. I think it's Clarksville, Tennessee. So my wife's going to go to Louisville, and so we'd have been about 2 hours apart. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? Okay, I'll do that. So I give up my high school job, and we're going to, she's going to Louisville and I'm going to Tennessee. And I am literally moving her into her apartment in Louisville. And then I'm supposed to go to Clarksville, Tennessee, and they're going to put me up in some place. And I don't even know what I'm doing. And I take a break from moving. I'm sitting on the curb outside of her apartment reading the USA Today sports page. So this is all pre-internet, pre-cell phone, all of that stuff. And, the first thing you did, if you're a sports guy, the first thing you would do is go to the sports page. You'd open it up and you'd look at the inside page, which has all the transactions, right? Who got traded, who quit, all of that stuff. So I open up the sports page and I see that the guy who's hired me has resigned. And I'm like, this can't be good. And to this day, I've never talked to the guy. He doesn't have phone, right? He doesn't have, it's like, first of all, it's harder to get a hold of people, right? And I call the office, talk to the assistant, and he's like, yeah, he's known he was out for a while, and you can come up here if you want, but he really hasn't. He was supposed to fund this position through like the booster club or something like that. He's like, we don't really have anything for you. And I'm like, and now it's too late. I can't get my high school job back. Right. It's like, I don't know, end of August, 1st of September, something like that. School's starting everywhere. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh man, I don't even know how to bartend anything. Right. Like, I don't even know how to make a drink. So, and I think I went there and the thing was so messed up. I was just like, this, I can't, they said, you can come and work and volunteer, but we can't pay you or feed you or anything. I'm like, I'm not going there. And so I go back to Louisville, and I'll never forget, I had a big paper cup full of quarters because my wife didn't even have a phone working in her apartment. Down on the corner, and I got my little address book with everybody's phone numbers in it, right? And I'm just dialing, right? I'm feeding change into this phone and dialing people up because I couldn't email them or text them or whatever. It's just harder to do all that stuff. And so I got a hold of a buddy of mine who was a GA at Cornell in the Ivy League. And he was working for, and what's interesting is that he happened to be a DePauw grad. And I didn't even know where DePauw was at that point in time. And I ended up working there for 30 years. But he's working for a night guy. So a guy named Tommy Miller, who had been with Knight when they won the championship in '76, and so he was kind of clued into everything that was going on with Knight. So he happened to know that that a guy who was working with Krzyzewski at Duke was one of his top guys when he was at Army, and then he went with Krzyzewski his first 3 years at Duke. Had just taken this job at the University of the South in Sewanee, Tennessee, which wasn't very far from where I was right then. And he said, I'll call him. I don't think he's got an assistant. And, strangely, he calls the guy. I get hooked up with the guy. A day later, I drive there. I spend the day with him, and he offers me a job. And I worked for him for 2 years as his assistant. The first year, he had just gotten married, just got out of Division I. And he's like, you can do this for a year or two, and we'll find something else for you because I'm going to stay here for the rest of my life. He thought they might make him the AD and that kind of stuff. But, Division III, especially back then, it's better now, but especially back then, it was not Division I. You were driving vans, and as a coach, you were driving every single mile, and the first year got over, and he said, if you want to stick around, you can probably get this job because I'm gonna get out of here as fast as I can. And so we go through year 2 and he can't get out. Like he's been trying to get out and he just hasn't hit the thing that he wants to do. And we're getting ready to start practice in year 3 and I'm like, it's time. I got to get out of here. Right. Like this is not where I want to stay. And we are probably 2 weeks from the start of practice, maybe 3. And he gets an assistant AD job at William and Mary. The guy who was the track coach at Army or something had become the AD at William and Mary and knew him and hired. And, the Sewanee, the place where we were, they were kind of up against it. They didn't really have much choice. They had to hire me. So I'm 26 or whatever. And all of a sudden I'm a college head coach. So don't try this at home, kids. It's a little riskier than you'd want it to be.
What was that transition like? I mean, you obviously went through 2 pretty big transitions in a short amount of time, going from first high school to the college level, and then going from an assistant coach to being a very, very young head coach. So what do you just remember about that sort of transitional period of your coaching and kind of who you were as a coach at that point?
Well, the good news about it was I had already been a head coach for 2 years. I mean, it was high school, but right. I had already been the voice in the practice sessions and those kinds of things, right? So from a comfort standpoint, I was pretty comfortable being that guy. As far as knowing what I was doing, I was clueless. So I was faking it like crazy. And as fate would have it, the first year, I kind of get this mixed up, but the first year I'm going to say was also the shot clock, right? So beyond trying to be a head coach in college, when you're only, 4 years older than your seniors, right?
Right.
Now you also got to adjust to the shot clock. I mean, the good news is when the shot clock started, it started at 45 seconds. So it felt like a week anyway, right? It really wasn't as difficult as you might think. And then the second year was the 3-point line. So those were like back to back, maybe the 2 biggest changes in college basketball in the last 40 years, right? Were my first 2 years as a head coach. So there was a lot of stuff to navigate. And when you're leading, I think it's okay to be transparent, when you don't know things, but you also, if you don't know, sometimes you got to act like right? Until you figure it out. So I did quite a bit of pretending and quite a bit of late nights and trying to make sure I was making the right decisions and those kinds of things. And you don't always make all the right decisions when you're starting out. Well, even when you're ending, you don't make the right decisions. But it was fun. It was exciting. I was just kind of I was kind of too dumb to know how hard it really was. It really was, right? I was just having fun. I was really, really lucky because the players were very receptive, right? I mean, I'm a young guy. I had a different role as an assistant. And, the 3 guys that were seniors on that first team of mine are 3 guys that I still keep in contact. And I just saw them all together in March. and they're all three still really active with the school. In fact, one of them was the chairman of the board. So it was an amazing experience. So I was the head coach there for 3 years before I moved on.
Hey coaches, we know you're invested in the next generation of athletes, so why not give them the star treatment this season with Game Changer, a free app that provides you with the tools to help your players improve. Review game film, game stats, and cumulative season statistics with your team to keep players motivated all season long. Live stream your games for free and enjoy automatic highlight clips. Download Game Changer now on iOS or Android. Game Changer equips your team with the tools they need to stay engaged. Download it today and make this season one for the books. Game Changer. Stream, score, connect. Learn more at gc.com/hoopheads. That's gc.com/hoopheads. Then you head to Rose-Hulman in Indiana. Is that a move to get closer towards Wisconsin? Is that a move because you thought that the school was going to be a better fit? Was that a move for what was the process? What was the thought?
Well, Division III was, I mean, when I was a college player, I didn't even know there was a Division III. Right? Like, I didn't.
No, I believe you. I completely believe you.
I didn't know anything about it, and it was, this is the early mid '80s, and generally speaking, these schools, they were not really investing in athletics, right? For the most part, some were, but a lot weren't. And the place that I was at that time really was not, right? So I finished year 3. I've got we just had our second child, and I'm out working camps all summer to try to make some extra money, right? And I came back from working camp, and I'm like, I'm probably only going to be able to do this one more year. I mean, they weren't paying me, and right. I just didn't know. I didn't have any idea what the going rate was. I just thought nobody was getting paid, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I didn't know any better. And I mean, I wasn't getting paid as a private school high school coach either, but I didn't have 2 kids then either, and I was just starting out. But I wasn't getting paid any better as a college head coach. And I'm like, I'll do this one more year, and then I've got to, maybe give it up, maybe go do something else. I don't know. So strangely, within that week of me coming to that realization, I got a call from an athletic director at Rose-Hulman, who we happened to be in the same league, and he was calling about my assistant. So they had a longtime head coach who was retiring, and he was just kind of vetting different people who he thought might be interested. And he's a guy that I knew because he had been on the football staff at Northwestern when I was a player, and the football coach at Rose-Hulman had been a football player at Northwestern who I knew. And so they're just trying to pick my brain, and he's telling me about the job, and then he tells me what it's going to pay. And I'm like, really? And so, like, what it was going to pay was a 70% pay raise from what I was going to make, what I was making. 70% is a lot, right?
That's pretty good. That's a pretty good raise.
It's a good enough raise where you don't have to think, oh, I got to get out of coaching, right? And because that was kind of what was on my mind at the time. I just, I can't afford to do this. And I'm like, well, to hell with my assistant. What about me? and he's like, well, would you be interested? And I'm like, hell yeah, I'd be interested. So I went up there and interviewed for the job. They offered it to me, and I came back to because I liked where I was at. I just wasn't getting paid. And I went to the AD and I said, here's what's going on. Cause we were getting progressively better. And I had just recruited the kid who's still the all-time leading scorer, and he had been a freshman, and we were getting it figured out. And but he basically was like, well, good luck, and because there's no more money for this spot. And so I loaded the troops up, and this is late now. This is September, right? So it happened really fast, and it was a really good move for us. That was a great place. We were able to win some games. We made the NCAA tournament, and had some terrific experiences.
When you spent a season at Southwestern.
Yeah. I knew I shouldn't have sent you that resume. You got all the info. Well, that they sort of we had some pretty good teams at Rose-Hulman, and I was, I think, starting to develop a little bit of a reputation, and somehow they got my name, and they were an NAIA school that was going Division III, right? And they wanted to get because basketball was kind of their thing. They didn't have football, and they wanted to get a guy with some D3 experience that coach some winning teams and to help them kind of navigate, because none of them knew what that was, right? They didn't have any idea what it was. So they were moving. They still had kids with scholarship money and all of that kind of stuff. So they were moving to D3, and they kind of thought they were going to get in this league that was basically the same league we were in, and it turned out to, years later, it turned out that they did. But I'm down there, and at the time, there are only 3 Division III schools in the state of Texas, right? So you're going to have to take this job, and you're going to be independent the first year, but they're telling me, yeah, but the next year we're going to be in this league, right? Well, I take the job, and then they get rejected for the league. So now I'm in Texas. There's nobody to play. Texas is, you guys have probably been there. It's really big, right? and you're really far away from lots of stuff. And so you can be a D3 and play an NAIA schedule and just get beat up on by all these scholarship guys and stuff like that. So it was not going to be what I thought it was going to be. I liked it, and we had a great year that first year I was there, and really had some good success and some good experiences, and I could have figured it out, but strangely, DePauw kind of came after me, and that was a place that I was familiar with. I knew people there. We had competed against them when I was at Rose-Hulman, and just the tenuous aspect of where Southwestern was at that point just made me feel like maybe the smartest thing would be to not hang around. So it was a weird time, because we were down there for 11 months. So we moved from Terre Haute, Indiana to Georgetown, Texas, which is right outside of Austin. And then we built a house that was designed by my father-in-law, who's an architect. Never moved into it, sold it before it was finished. And this is, 4 years later, and 35 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 years later I only hear about it, once a week now from my wife that we never moved into the house.
Did she know what? Did
but
she know what she was Did she know what she was signing up for?
she had no idea. She's no, it was that was not a good time. She didn't want to go. She didn't want to go back. It was all, when we had two really little kids at that time. So it was a crazy time. And then you realize, well, that's when you need stuff like that to happen to you when you're young, because you still have the energy to be able to,
right,
kind of plow your way through it and kind of manage it. But that year was, it's still a blur when I think back on it. That was just a lot of things going down in a really fast. And all of a sudden we found ourselves back in Indiana.
All right. So when it comes to the DePauw job, what did you see as being the opportunity there? And then what did you see as being the challenges, if you can think back to the beginning of your tenure?
Well, they had been really good. So the guy who was coaching them was a guy named Rose-Hulman, who had been a night assistant. And Royce ended up going to the University of Indianapolis, killed it there, and then got the Indiana State job and was the head coach at Indiana State, took him to the tournament a couple times, and was a really, really good coach. And he did a great job at DePauw. And so I thought the things that you need to win were in place. And very often when you're looking at things from the outside, they don't look exactly the same. You get on the inside, but that's neither here nor there. It's still a good place. And at the time, I thought, now I'm maybe 34 or 33, something like that, and I'm thinking early on in my career, my dream was to maybe coach in the Ivy League, right? And so I thought, well, if I could get there and win big, and have some luck, I might be able to do that, because this was still pre-internet, pre-ESPN, all of that stuff. Coaches were still not making a lot of money, right? And there wasn't a lot of TV exposure. There wasn't all of those things that you see today that kind of took off when cable TV became a thing, right? And ESPN became a thing. Then all of a sudden, coaches are making all kinds of money, and then decisions get made differently because of the money. But back then, you would see guys jump levels. In fact, the guy before Rose-Hulman at DePauw, he got the Dartmouth job and gave it back. Like, went out there, did the press conference, decided he didn't want to do it, and came back. And then a year later, he got the East Carolina job. So he got 2 Division I jobs, boom, boom. And Rose-Hulman went and got a Division II job that led to a Division I job. So at the time, that didn't seem crazy, right? But, later, within 2 years, the landscape just completely changed, right? And so you look at guys like, Bo Ryan, who won like 4 or 5 national championships at Platteville. He couldn't get a sniff forever to get to the Division I level. And there's just, all kinds of really good coaches were no longer going to get considered for the Division I level just because people weren't going to take a chance. They'd rather take an assistant from, a Power 5 conference than take a chance on a guy who's got a great record as a small college coach. And you still see that today. You just don't see that sort of movement in the business. And it really, I really think that all changed when TV kind of took over.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you said, it's rare that you see that kind of that kind of move. And you obviously get settled in at DePauw and to spend the bulk of your entire career there. So let's just start with, what do you think were the keys to the success that you were able to have? If you could point to 2 or 3 things that you can kind of sum up what you were able to do at DePauw, what were the keys to your success?
Well, it really helps to be in a great place. So DePauw is really, really good school academically. So we were able to attract extremely bright kids who, I don't think because you're a great student it has to necessarily preclude you being interested in being a really good basketball player. So we were able to find a lot of guys who cared about both things, and that kind of fit my personality. And I was able to relate to those guys, I think, pretty well. So I think that's the number one thing, being in a good place. Because I think if you're not in a good place, especially at the small college level, at the highest levels, you just, you're selling yourself in your locker room and your facility and those kinds of things, because typically that's what the kids care the most about. At the small college level, you really got to sell the whole package, and you need to have a good package to sell. And we did have that. We had high level academics and really high levels competitive small college basketball. And I think those 2 things were the keys to getting good players. It's like anything else. It cycles. We were always pretty good, and sometimes we were really good, and sometimes we were really, really, and if you don't have those things, then you might spend a few years. If you do it long enough, you have a few years where you're really bad, and that's no fun.
No, it's not fun when your team is not winning. It definitely is not nearly as enjoyable of an experience. So when you got the players on campus, the recruiting process is over. Now you got guys that are a part of your team. How did you think about developing them, not just as players, but also as leaders? Because I know when you talk about, especially at the Division III level, then you talk about the off season and just the fact that guys are kind of going their own separate ways. How did you develop leaders in your program?
Well, now it's changed a little bit, right? So I was on the NABC Congress. I was doing a bunch of things, trying to be involved nationally with having a voice through the Coaches Association to try to get at least some out-of-season contact with players. So, typically, basically for my entire career, from the last game to the first practice the next year, you had to be hands off with guys. Like, they could come and see you, but you couldn't do anything with them. So if you were walking through the gym while they were playing pickup, technically you were in violation, right? So I think those things are were really tricky for a long time. So, a lot of the things that you do in the off season and that sort of stuff really had to be player driven. So that's why, establishing your culture and the way you want things to be and the way you want the players to think of themselves and that sort of thing is really important, because at our level, it had to sustain you through the off season, right? If otherwise you're reinventing the wheel every year, but you don't necessarily get to be the driver of that all the time, right? Because you just didn't have the contact for guys. And so that was a really difficult thing to do. Luckily, we had a lot of great kids who bought into the things that we were selling. And basically what we were selling was, we think you can be great in everything that you're trying to do, right? So we want you to strive for excellence, on and off the court. And I really was big on trying to get our guys to come out of their comfort zones. When you're at a place like DePauw, I mean, it's a world-class, top-tier liberal arts college, right? So, you're going to get exposed to so many different things if you want to, right? Like, there's readings and guest speakers and, people coming in from all over the world on a weekly basis, but they're not going to come to your dorm room and knock on the door and say, hey, you know what? Bill Clinton is speaking in the gym tonight. Do you have an interest? They're not going to invite you personally to these things. You got to be paying attention. And I was really big on that. I did not want our guys to see themselves as stereotypical athletes, right? I wanted them to see themselves as guys who were trying to become citizens of the world, right? And it's the only way you learn is by coming out of your comfort zone. So one of the things, I was a big acronym guy, right? And so we always had a bunch of acronyms that we'd put them on your shorts or you put it on the shirt or whatever. And we wouldn't necessarily tell other people what they stood for. So it was kind of secret shit, right? So, we wouldn't, it was just kind of our thing. We didn't necessarily share it with other people. And so one of the things was, and we'd usually have one for the season and then we just have some that carried over and stuff like that. And I actually, a kid sent me a video. One of our former players, is the president of the student body there right now. And he had to give an address to the freshmen. So he was a freshman on my last team. And he went through these acronyms for these freshmen that were just coming into school. They had the whole class. He was giving them the whole thing. So one of them was GCF. So it stood for good, clean, fun, right? So I tried to get our guys to say, okay, anybody can drink beer every night, right? Just because you're in college, that doesn't mean that's what you have to do, right? I mean, I used to tell them, like, I'm 65. I might have a beer tonight. You can do that for the rest of your life, but you're never going to be in a place again where you're going to be exposed to all this stuff and it's free and you can walk to it, right? And so GCF meant, do something fun that you might not really recognize as fun, but if you do it, you might have some fun. So whether that's going to a play, right, or going to a field hockey game or going to a reading or whatever, I would try to get them to just come out of their comfort zone, learn a little bit about something that they don't know, right? And that's not that easy to convince guys to do that kind of stuff. So we had a school of music at DePauw, and they'd have, a couple of operas a year. And I'm like, well, why don't we go to the opera? And they looked at me like, I had two heads, right? And it's like, well, Coach, I don't like the opera. And I said, you don't get to say you don't like the opera if you've never been to an opera. It just doesn't work like that, right? If you go and you don't like it, fine, right? But if you never go and you just kind of have this idea of what it is, but you've never really had the experience, that's kind of the definition of ignorance. And so, we'd get them to do stuff like that. And I think one of the things, and you guys have probably had this experience, is that, you're getting through to kids and players when they start repeating the stupid things that you said, right? And so because they think they're making fun of you, but they don't know that the diabolical aspect of it is you're really getting in their heads a little bit, right? And so they were always talking about the GCF, so they would always come to me and say, because we tried to do a lot of that stuff as a team. We try to encourage them to do it as individuals. And so they always had this kind of screening process as to, well, what counts for GCF and what doesn't count for GCF, right? And so we beat it around a little bit and that sort of stuff. So we had another one. And the kid actually used it in his talk the other day. And that's TATGOD, TATGOD. And so a lot of times, you're on a college campus. Sometimes the kids look like ghosts, right? They haven't slept and everything's so hard and there's too much homework and everything's really difficult and bad practice, bad tests, blah, 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 blah. And so TATGOD stands for these are the good old days, right? And I would try to convince our guys that, as difficult as things seem sometimes, you got to know this time that you're living in your life right now is the time you're going to be looking back on and talking about, right? This is going to be a highlight of your existence, and it's going to be for the rest of your life. So if you can keep that in perspective and recognize that you're actually living in the good old days right now, you're going to be money ahead. And you'd be surprised how many guys I hear from 10 years later, 15 years later, who didn't always get it at the time, but eventually they do get it, and that's pretty rewarding.
Yeah, that long-term impact that coaches can have on players is something that I think we've talked to so many guys about, that when you get an opportunity to have players reach back out to you and talk to you about things that are going on in their life 10, 15 years down the road from when you coached them, there really is nothing more important, more rewarding, that lets you know that you had that long-lasting impact. And I think that's a really important part of coaching. For you, when you look ahead now that you've retired and you're trying to stay active in the game, what's next for you? What do you see as being your biggest challenge moving forward here?
So I'm trying to learn how to be a broadcaster. So that's been really fun. So I've been working for this network, ISC in Indiana, doing high school and small college games, and then I'm going to have the opportunity to do some games from Notre Dame in their preseason. So that is going to be pretty challenging for me. I'm also trying to figure out. I'm also thinking about starting a little bit of what I would call a kind of an informal consulting business. So, and I'm still working on what form that's going to take. Like, I don't want to do any focus groups and surveys and stuff like that. I just want to come over and spend some time with coaches, give back a little bit, sit in on practices and meetings and stuff like that, and give guys maybe another set of eyes. I think that, very often, especially high school and small college guys are, it's really difficult you get on that hamster wheel, right? You're maybe understaffed, you're teaching, you got all these other things going on. And, you kind of get on that hamster wheel and you don't really see everything that's going on. And very often the differences are they're small, right? They're details. And having another set of eyes that's maybe not there every day and can give you a little bit of a different perspective is something that I'm playing around with that idea. Still not sure exactly what that's going to look like, but I think that would be a lot of fun, and that would make me happy, at least in terms of thinking that I'm giving back to the game a little bit. So I think that's and obviously when so the guy who's coaching Notre Dame is a guy named Micah Shrewsbury, who was just came from Penn State. Last year was his first year there. And I think he's going to really get him going. And he was a GA for me back in the early 2000s, and worked with me and for me for 2 years. So just seeing guys who you've maybe had a little bit of a hand in their careers and stuff just take off and have unbelievable success is incredibly rewarding. So I'm for no other reason than that, I'm looking forward to kind of getting a little closer to their program.
Well, that sounds like a really great second act. I mean, the opportunity to call Notre Dame games and then work those small college games as well, kind of back where you've been rooted for your entire career. Really great opportunity. Before we get out, I want to give you a chance to share how people can connect with you, whether you want to share email, website, social media, whatever you feel comfortable with. And then after you do that, I'll jump back in and wrap things up.
Yeah, sure. I'm my email is Bill Fenlon, BILLFENLON, the number 22 @gmail.com. And anybody who's interested, one of the things that I've also done is I've written a couple of articles that people might find of interest. One of them is about the situation that comes up at the end of the game when you're up 3. It's kind of a big discussion point. Like, do you foul? Do you not foul? And I worked through all that with a math professor at DePauw and did all the probabilities and stuff like that. And people love that thing. So I'm happy to send that to anybody who has an interest, and also happy to just have people bounce things off of me. If I can help, I'm happy to do it.
Bill, can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your schedule tonight to join us. Really appreciate it. And to everyone out there, thanks for listening. And we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks. Your first impression is everything when applying for a new coaching job. A professional coaching portfolio is the tool that highlights your coaching achievements and philosophies, and most of all, helps separate you and your abilities from the other applicants. The Coaching Portfolio Guide is an instructional membership-based website that helps you develop a personalized portfolio. Each section of the Portfolio Guide provides detailed instructions on how to organize your portfolio in a professional manner. The guide also provides sample documents for each section of your portfolio that you can copy, modify, and add to your personal portfolio. As a Hoopheads Pod listener, you can get your Coaching Portfolio Guide for just $25. Visit coachingportfolioguide.com/hoopheads to learn more.
Thanks for listening to the Hoopheads podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.